Picture this scenario for a moment. You spent years pouring your heart, your time, and your energy into someone who always seemed larger than life. They had this particular way of making you feel seen, admired, even needed. And for a long stretch of time, you genuinely believed that connection could never be shaken. You gave everything you had to that relationship, constantly navigating their shifting moods, their expectations, and the endless push and pull of their attention. And then, one day, quietly, almost without you even noticing it happening, you realized you simply couldn't keep doing it anymore. You understood that to protect yourself, to reclaim your own sense of worth, you had to walk away for good, permanently. The moment you actually left, the world didn't fall apart or explode into chaos. There were no dramatic confrontations, no fireworks, nothing loud. You simply stepped forward into your own life, leaving them behind in the quiet echo of your absence. And it was within that very silence, that empty space you left behind, that a truth finally settled in for them, a truth they almost never allow themselves to face directly. You were gone, permanently. They didn't scream, they didn't beg you to stay. But internally, something fundamental shifted. Their carefully built world, one constructed entirely around control and influence, began to crack at its foundation. The disbelief, the anger, the subtle attempts to reach back out to you, all of it originated right there in that quiet moment of realization. And while the outside world might never actually witness it, an internal storm had already begun brewing beneath the surface. As one wise voice once put it, some people only come to understand the true value of what they've lost once it no longer belongs to them anymore. For someone with narcissistic tendencies, that particular realization doesn't just sting a little, it directly challenges the very core of who they believe themselves to be, shaking loose the entire foundation of control, power, and validation they've spent an entire lifetime carefully constructing. When a narcissist first truly realizes that you're gone for good, their initial reaction is almost always shock. And this isn't the ordinary kind of shock most people experience in everyday life. This is a deeper psychological shock, the specific kind that rattles someone accustomed to constant control, admiration, and validation from everyone around them. The sudden awareness that you're no longer available to play that role in their life feels almost like an earthquake, something that shakes the very foundations of the carefully constructed world they've built for themselves. They might look completely calm on the surface, but internally, their mind is racing frantically, scrambling to make sense of what just happened. This shock typically comes paired with an intense sense of disbelief. Narcissists tend to operate within a reality where their influence feels absolute and unquestionable. They genuinely believe that with enough charm, manipulation, or applied pressure, they can bend almost any situation or person to their will. So when someone actually leaves for good, it directly conflicts with their fundamental assumption that they're indispensable, that the world naturally revolves around them, and that people simply can't walk away from them permanently. This disbelief isn't just some fleeting moment either. It can linger for days, sometimes even weeks, as they struggle to reconcile the harsh truth with the story they've always told themselves about their relationships. In a lot of cases, this disbelief shows up as outright denial. They might mentally replay past interactions over and over, searching desperately for some way to undo your departure or to rationalize it as something merely temporary. They might tell themselves things like, they'll come back eventually, or they don't really mean it, even when directly confronted with clear evidence that you're truly gone. A narcissist can still cling stubbornly to the hope that there's some loophole somewhere, some possible way to restore the old dynamic between you. Their mind actively resists accepting the permanence of your absence because accepting it fully would mean acknowledging a genuine loss of control, something they find almost impossible to tolerate. This period of shock isn't purely emotional either, it's deeply cognitive as well. Narcissists invest heavily in maintaining a very particular image of their relationships. They construct an entire internal story about how other people depend on them, how they're admired or loved unconditionally by those around them. When you leave, it doesn't just sever a connection, it actually shatters the entire narrative they've built about themselves. That disbelief functions partly as a defense mechanism, a kind of mental buffer, protecting them against the overwhelming reality of losing someone who played such a significant role within their psychological world. Another layer of this shock involves a deep internal sense of humiliation. Narcissists often hide their underlying vulnerability behind a carefully maintained mask of confidence, but permanently losing someone exposes a real fracture in that facade. That initial disbelief can quickly transform into a feeling of personal insult. They find themselves wondering how this could even happen, why you would ever choose to leave, and what it might say about them as a person. In their minds, being left isn't merely some logistical inconvenience or relational hiccup, it's a direct reflection of their own worth, their public image, and their perceived control over the world around them. That shock becomes tangled up with a deeply bruised ego, one struggling to process the fact that someone could actually defy them and simply walk away without their permission. Interestingly enough, this disbelief can also spiral into obsessive thinking patterns. They might replay every single conversation, every shared moment, every interaction, desperately trying to pinpoint exactly where things went wrong or how they failed to prevent your departure. And even though they typically refuse to take any genuine personal responsibility, this obsessive mental rumination is still very much part of their shock response. Their mind is essentially trying to restore some sense of order that's been completely disrupted. They might even go as far as imagining elaborate scenarios where you eventually return or start plotting strategies designed to regain influence over you, all of it fueled entirely by that initial disbelief and their inability to accept your absence as permanent. It's worth noting that this shock usually remains completely invisible to the outside world. Narcissists tend to be remarkably skilled at hiding their inner turmoil, especially whenever they suspect it might make them appear weak to others. To friends, coworkers, or even casual acquaintances, they might seem entirely unaffected, as though life is simply continuing on as normal. But underneath that calm exterior, their mind is genuinely in turmoil. That disbelief simmers quietly beneath the surface, driving emotions and behaviors that might appear subtle or even confusing to outside observers. Small gestures, indirect messages, or sudden attempts to reinsert themselves back into your life often trace directly back to this hidden shock. Over time, the sheer intensity of that disbelief might gradually fade, but its underlying impact tends to remain. It represents the exact moment a narcissist realizes, often for the very first time in their life, that their control was never actually absolute, and that people genuinely can leave them permanently. That particular realization is deeply unsettling, and it can trigger an entire cascade of other emotional and behavioral responses, ranging from renewed attempts to regain control, all the way to subtle acts of sabotage or emotional manipulation, all stemming directly from that initial disbelief and their inability to fully process your departure. Ultimately, this shock and disbelief serves as a mirror reflecting the narcissist's own inner fragility. While they might project confidence, superiority, or complete detachment outwardly, the moment you leave for good exposes a vulnerability they rarely, if ever, allow themselves to show. It's a profound realization that someone could actually reject their influence entirely, that their presence in someone's life isn't truly indispensable after all. This shock isn't merely about losing you specifically, it's about confronting a much larger truth they've spent an entire lifetime actively avoiding, that the world doesn't actually revolve around them, and that even they can't control absolutely everything and everyone in their orbit. When a narcissist comes to terms with the fact that you're truly gone for good, one of the most intense emotions they experience is a profound loss of control. Control essentially functions as the lens through which they view the entire world. It forms the foundation of their relationships and their overall sense of self. They're deeply accustomed to orchestrating how people behave around them, shaping narratives entirely to their liking, and receiving constant affirmation from those around them. Losing someone permanently completely disrupts that carefully maintained sense of order. Suddenly, the narrative they've always believed in, the one where they occupy the center, where they shape absolutely everything, gets shattered entirely. This loss of control isn't simply about someone leaving physically or emotionally either. It actually cuts much deeper than that. It represents a genuine violation of their internal belief system. Narcissists frequently assume that people simply cannot truly say no to them or reject them completely. When faced with your permanent departure, they're forced to confront the reality that their influence actually has real limits. This recognition proves deeply unsettling because it directly contradicts the story they've told themselves about being indispensable, admired, or even feared by others. In their minds, control is intimately tied to their entire identity. Without it, there's a genuine fracture, a sense of disorientation that can feel almost panic-inducing. In this particular state, narcissists often experience a kind of desperate, gnawing anxiety. They might frantically try to figure out exactly what went wrong, but their underlying concern rarely centers on genuinely understanding your needs or emotions. Instead, it revolves almost entirely around restoring their own grip on the situation. Thoughts might spin wildly through their mind. How do I get them back? What can I possibly say or do to regain my influence over them? Even small gestures, like sudden unexpected messages, indirect contact through mutual friends, or carefully monitoring your social media activity, are often just attempts to reassert some sense of control. Every single action becomes measured, calculated, and specifically aimed at reclaiming the power they feel slipping steadily away from them. This overwhelming need for control is also closely tied to validation. Narcissists genuinely feed off the sense that people depend on them or look to them for approval. When you leave permanently, that crucial validation simply disappears entirely. They can no longer dictate your emotions, your responses, or your reactions in any way. And the absence of that influence creates a vacuum that feels both deeply confusing and genuinely threatening to them. They might feel profoundly lost, not in some personal or reflective sense, but in the sense that their world no longer operates according to their design. This fundamental lack of control can trigger subtle, yet relentless attempts to regain it, sometimes cleverly disguised as concern, care, or simple curiosity. This loss of control can also spark irrational or obsessive thinking patterns. Narcissists might replay events, conversations, and interactions repeatedly in their minds, constantly searching for ways to reclaim the dynamic they once had with you. Their mind essentially becomes a looping space filled with endless if-only statements and hypothetical scenarios. This isn't genuine introspection in any healthy sense. It's really about restoring their own power and influence. They rarely pause to consider your actual perspective or respect your personal autonomy in any of this. Their focus remains squarely on controlling the overall narrative in order to protect their fragile ego. At times, this loss of control might manifest in more covert or passive-aggressive ways. A narcissist might subtly manipulate circumstances specifically to provoke a reaction from you, test your boundaries, or indirectly reinsert themselves back into your life somehow. They might even attempt to undermine your confidence or emotional stability from a distance, not necessarily out of genuine hatred, but simply out of an overwhelming compulsion to feel back in command again. Even when their actions appear calm or completely harmless on the surface, underneath it all lies a silent, ongoing struggle with the harsh reality that they're no longer in control of the situation. Emotionally speaking, this entire experience can feel deeply disorienting for them. Narcissists are typically very uncomfortable with genuine vulnerability. Losing control exposes them directly to emotions they're simply not accustomed to processing, things like uncertainty, helplessness, and real fear. Because they genuinely cannot tolerate openly experiencing these feelings, they often mask them instead with anger, sarcasm, or feigned indifference. Yet internally, the anxiety and discomfort can run remarkably deep. It represents a stark confrontation with a truth they rarely ever acknowledge, that they simply cannot manage every outcome or dictate the course of every relationship in their life. This loss of control also significantly affects how they perceive themselves overall. Narcissists tend to construct their entire identity around being dominant, admired, or seemingly indispensable to others. When someone leaves them permanently, it poses a direct threat to that carefully built identity. Their mind might scramble frantically to reinterpret the entire situation in a way that preserves their self-image, but no amount of mental rationalization can ever fully restore the control they once genuinely held. This ongoing tension between the harsh reality of loss and their deep need for dominance creates real internal conflict, a kind of silent turmoil that fuels many of the behaviors you might notice from them afterward. Interestingly, this loss of control tends to be processed much more slowly than the initial shock. While disbelief hits almost immediately, the deeper understanding that their influence has been permanently diminished tends to seep in gradually over time. They might oscillate between renewed attempts to regain control, moments of intense frustration, and brief periods of apparent calm. This ongoing internal struggle really highlights just how deeply the concept of control is embedded within their overall psyche. It's never simply about manipulation in any single moment. It's really about maintaining an overarching sense of power and personal significance that has now been directly challenged. Ultimately, this loss of control stands as one of the most defining experiences a narcissist ever goes through. When someone leaves them forever, it's never simply about that person walking away physically. It's really about the gradual erosion of the entire structure they've relied on to feel safe, important, and powerful in the world. Every single thought, behavior, and subtle attempt at influence that follows is rooted firmly in this fundamental underlying fear. The fear that they can no longer manage the world the way they once could, and that someone's permanent absence has revealed a genuine vulnerability they rarely admit even exists within themselves. When a narcissist truly realizes you're gone for good, one of the most intense yet frequently overlooked reactions is a deeply hidden anger. This isn't always the explosive, outwardly aggressive kind of anger most people might expect to see. In many cases, it's actually a quiet, slowly simmering rage that lingers just beneath the surface, subtly shaping their thoughts, behaviors, and interactions without ever becoming immediately visible to anyone around them. It's a rage born from genuine frustration, humiliation, and the sudden jarring awareness that someone has actually managed to escape their influence entirely. This particular anger stems from a deep, ingrained sense of entitlement. Narcissists become thoroughly accustomed to having the people in their lives comply with their wishes, seek out their approval, or respond directly to their needs. When someone leaves permanently, it directly challenges their core belief that the world should conform entirely to them. The very idea that a person could reject them, defy them, or simply move on without their permission triggers intense internal irritation. They might genuinely feel cheated, almost as though some unspoken rule they operate by has been broken or disrespected. This breach of their expectations gets experienced as a deeply personal affront, and anger naturally follows close behind. Often, this rage stays internalized rather than being openly displayed. Narcissists are typically skilled at maintaining a composed exterior, especially whenever outward expressions of emotion might compromise their carefully curated image or make them appear weak to others. While they might not yell, throw things, or lash out physically in any obvious way, the underlying intensity of their feelings remains completely real and potent. They might dwell obsessively on perceived slights, mentally replay various interactions, or imagine elaborate ways to retaliate, all of which reinforces that quiet, ongoing anger that can genuinely persist for months or even years afterward. Part of this simmering anger is directly tied to humiliation and deeply bruised pride. Being left behind fundamentally challenges the narcissist's carefully curated self-image. They've spent their entire lifetime cultivating the impression that they're essential, desirable, and genuinely influential. When someone actually leaves, it directly contradicts that narrative and exposes a vulnerability they rarely ever acknowledge, even to themselves. This hidden rage often functions as a defense mechanism, a way to protect themselves from the sheer discomfort of feeling powerless or rejected. By channeling that rage inward instead of outward, they attempt to maintain some level of control over how others perceive them, even while privately struggling with feelings they simply cannot express openly to anyone. This hidden anger can also fuel obsessive thinking patterns over time. Narcissists might replay every single word, gesture, and moment together, desperately trying to pinpoint exactly how they were wronged or how they might regain their lost influence. Even when they appear outwardly calm or completely indifferent, their mind might be entirely consumed with scenarios involving retribution or renewed attempts to reassert dominance over the situation. This internalized rage is rarely productive or genuinely healthy in any real sense. It's focused almost entirely on restoring their own sense of control and validating their fragile ego, rather than processing the actual situation realistically. Interestingly, this anger often gets directed more toward themselves than toward the actual person who left, though they'll rarely ever admit that openly. They might quietly blame themselves for making some kind of mistake, for failing to manipulate the situation effectively enough, or for somehow allowing someone to escape their influence entirely. Yet because narcissists genuinely cannot sit comfortably with vulnerability or shame, these self-directed feelings quickly transform into irritation, resentment, or simmering anger instead. They mask that underlying sense of personal failure with externalized judgment, finding creative ways to frame the entire loss as being the other person's fault, or as some kind of personal injustice done to them. This hidden rage can also manifest through more passive or subtle behaviors. Narcissists might engage in actions specifically designed to provoke a reaction from you without appearing outright aggressive. They might make indirect comments, spread certain rumors, or use mutual connections to quietly gauge your response to things. These actions tend to be carefully calculated, designed specifically to reassert their influence or to remind you subtly that they're still present in your life in some way. The underlying rage itself rarely becomes visible in any given moment. Instead, it gets encoded within behaviors that feel manipulative or genuinely unsettling, reflecting just how intense the feelings are that they're actively trying to contain. Emotionally, this hidden anger creates a persistent undercurrent of tension within them. Narcissists are rarely able to fully experience or express their feelings in any straightforward, healthy manner. Instead, that anger simmers quietly beneath the surface, subtly influencing their thoughts and behaviors while remaining largely invisible to everyone else around them. This ongoing simmering state can prove genuinely exhausting, fueling anxiety, obsessive thinking, and even a persistent sense of restlessness within them. The loss of someone who once validated or reinforced their ego represents a profound disruption, and this anger becomes one primary way they cope with that disruption without ever revealing genuine vulnerability to anyone. Over time, the sheer intensity of this hidden rage might naturally fluctuate. There may be certain moments when they appear completely calm or even entirely unaffected, followed by periods of subtle agitation or passive attempts to regain your attention somehow. But this underlying anger is never entirely absent. It simply shifts form and expression depending on the circumstances and their own perception of how much control they currently have. They might even convince themselves that their feelings are entirely justified, reframing the whole situation to support a narrative where they're actually the wronged party in all of this. Ultimately, this hidden anger or simmering rage reflects the narcissist's own inner fragility. It's a direct response to the sudden loss of control, the challenge posed to their self-image, and the confrontation with a reality they simply cannot easily manipulate or control. While it might remain completely invisible to outside observers, it continues influencing their thoughts, decisions, and behaviors in ways that are subtle yet remarkably pervasive. It serves as a genuine reminder that beneath their exterior of composure, charm, or apparent indifference lies a powerful emotional response, one driven entirely by entitlement, frustration, and their fundamental inability to accept that someone has genuinely chosen to leave them forever. When a narcissist finally realizes that someone has left them for good, one of the most common reactions involves a genuine compulsion to reclaim or, in a sense, haunt that person's life. This isn't always dramatic or obvious in nature. Often it's actually quite subtle, carefully calculated, and deeply rooted in their need to reassert some form of influence. They've spent years shaping the entire dynamic of the relationship to center completely around themselves. So the very idea that someone could actually walk away permanently feels like a direct personal challenge to their sense of control. Their attempts to reach back out to you are rarely ever about genuine, healthy reconciliation. Instead, they're typically about testing your boundaries, provoking some kind of reaction, or simply reminding you that there's still very much a presence in your life somehow. These various attempts can take many different forms, and they often begin quite quietly. A narcissist might reach out through indirect channels, liking one of your social media posts, leaving a cryptic comment somewhere, or sending an unexpected message that seems casual on the surface but is actually loaded with deeper intent. They might check in through mutual friends or acquaintances, gathering information and trying to gauge exactly how you're currently doing emotionally. This isn't curiosity born from genuine care for your well-being. It's curiosity born entirely from their need to measure just how much remaining influence they still hold, and to see whether they can provoke some kind of response that reaffirms their sense of power over the situation. Even when they outwardly appear to have completely moved on, these underlying attempts often continue quietly behind the scenes. Narcissists tend to be highly attuned to perception and public image. They might present themselves as unaffected, confident, or even superior to the situation entirely. But hidden beneath that mask lies a strategic, ongoing effort to reclaim some genuine sense of control. Every single indirect interaction essentially functions as a test, a small experiment designed to see whether they can penetrate the walls you've carefully built around yourself. They genuinely want to know, are you thinking about me? Are you unsettled by my presence? Can I still matter in your life somehow, even from this distance? There's also a deeper psychological aspect underlying these haunting behaviors. Narcissists frequently struggle to process the sheer permanence of genuine loss. The very concept of someone leaving for good directly challenges the fundamental foundation of their entire worldview, the the belief that people simply cannot truly reject them, that their influence remains absolute no matter what. To cope with this uncomfortable reality, they engage in subtle strategies specifically designed to remain present in your life on a psychological level. Even if you never actually respond to them, the simple act of reaching out, commenting, or quietly observing can give them the illusion of continued relevance in your world. It becomes a way for them to manage their own underlying anxiety about being left behind entirely. These particular actions can sometimes escalate further if they feel especially threatened or humiliated by your absence. This passage describes narcissistic behavior after a breakup as manipulative attempts to regain attention and emotional control through indirect messages, social media signals, and ambiguity. It claims these actions are not genuine connection, but strategies to provoke reactions and maintain influence. It also says that when control is lost permanently, narcissists may shift into emotional numbness, outward detachment, and internal rumination as a defense against vulnerability. Overall, it frames the cycle as a mix of subtle manipulation, ego protection, and hidden emotional struggle rather than healthy emotional processing.